of naturopathy. And I believe very importantly his emphasis on manual work, the way in which work relates to the body and to one's sense of the self, the dignity of, say, cleaning toilets and so on. Embodied very literally his concern with and his attempt to work out his beliefs in dialogue with the world around him. And these practices recognized that the body that we inhabit is all at once a sensory self capable of feeling pain, pleasure, needing nutrition, and so on. It's a product of history. We inhabit our bodies through practices and attitudes that we have inherited as a part of our culture, as well as a thing of nature. So this idea of a sensory self, a thing of nature, and a product of history, all these aspects have to be addressed simultaneously in the quest for Swaraj. But there was a certain context in which Gandhi developed these ideas and worked them out. So what were the times that he lived in, the things that he believed in, and what challenges did he encounter in the quest for embodied Swaraj? And how did his context, his challenges differ from ours? And much of my talk, after I discuss Gandhi's context, is going to be in fact about a contemporary context and the way in which these ideas are relevant today and how we struggle to work them out in what we do. So addressing these questions with respect to nature and the body, we must begin by noting that Gandhi's context was mainly one of rural or village India. Its diverse ecological context, its traditions of farming as well as its traditions of healing, of dealing with the body. And yet, this rural India had undergone massive transformations even before Gandhi's time. Transformations that were speeded up by colonial rule. So if you look at cropping patterns, they were changed to accommodate new commercial crops like say indigo or opium or cotton and sugarcane, instead of the coarse cereals, pulses, other things of daily use that people were growing. If you look at other kinds of goods, industrially manufactured goods were promoted at the expense of artisanal, locally made products, mill-made cloth as opposed to, say, khadi and handloom. Western medicine was applied on a large scale, especially through public health programs, and tended to supersede other indigenous systems of healing, be it Siddha, Unani, Ayurvedic, or the whole range of local practices that in fact defy these kinds of systematic labels. New lifestyles and modes of consumption were also introduced at the time of colonial rule, and they came to be emulated. And part of this was, of course, the dominance of Western culture and civilization as a hegemonic project. But I also want to emphasize that many of these things were actually imposed. So if you look, for instance, at taxation policies, you would see how industrially manufactured goods made in Manchester or Liverpool were given preferential treatment compared to Indian goods, goods produced by artisans. The same holds true for agricultural policies that actually force people to grow certain crops, commercial crops, crops that were industrial inputs rather than growing food. The same holds true for, so if you look at something which is today such a common beverage like tea, tea was unknown in India till the British brought it in. And when they found that the British market for tea had been saturated, they made a concerted effort to try and get Indians to drink tea. So there were massive publicity campaigns, including demonstrations, going to people's homes, in the railways, giving people discounts on tea, giving them free samples, all to encourage them to take up the habit of drinking tea. Tea which has now become ubiquitous, but which is of dubious nutritional value. And all of these sorts of transformations in lifestyle, which Indians also took on gradually, were first quite systematically. These campaigns were conducted by British firms to encourage Indians to take on new lifestyles. Now the sum total of all these changes is hard to pin down, but one thing that I do want to focus on today is that they did induce a major crisis of confidence among Indians, which is to say that British domination came along with the full force of Western science and technology. And the superiority of the science and technology was reiterated in a variety of ways. If you look at education, Macaulay's dismissive statements about Indian knowledge or learning. If you look at other sorts of fields too, it was very clear that the British implicitly believed that their mode of knowing the world, of engaging with it, was far superior to Indian modes. And not only was this related to science and technology, but it was also the assertion of the superiority of Western civilization as a whole, its values, and not just the artifacts or the techniques that it produced. So how did Indians challenge this equation between imperialism and the idea that colonial rule was about civilization and improvement, the improvement of Indians and their landscapes? Now, different nationalists marshal different arguments. One, the theory of economic drain and impoverishment. The theory that is best summed up in Dadabhai Naoroji's book titled Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, the idea of the drain of wealth. Second, Indians emphasized the aspect of political rights, that we need to have equality for all subjects, the right to political representation. But with Gandhi, we get these arguments about economic and political rights, as well as a profound philosophical critique that addresses the question of civilizational values, as well as economic and political inequality and injustice. And this critique of and challenge to Western hegemony was based on questioning Western ethics in relation to the subjects of empire, both human subjects, ordinary people, as well as its natural and ecological elements. And it is this social and ecological critique, a challenge to those in power, but I believe equally a challenge to one's own self, the idea of Swaraj that we come back to, that I think is great contemporary relevance for one's own practices of mind and body in India today. So if Gandhi's context was dealing with colonial ideas, the imperialist force that undergirded science and technology, what is our context today? To all appearances, we have Swaraj. We believe we're a democracy, we rule ourselves, we're a sovereign state and nation. But ahimsa, or the idea of non-violence, and Swadeshi, or the idea of self-sufficiency, seem to have been lost sight of. So let me now discuss these two ideas, ahimsa, Swaraj, ahimsa and Swadeshi, these values in relation to the food that we eat and our bodies. And if you look at what is happening with Indian agriculture today and with the products of that agriculture coming to us and what we eat, we see that there's been a profound shift from Gandhi's times. For one, agriculture is in fact heavily industrialized. Many of us, including students, most often students of economics, grew up with this sort of traditional division. There's industry and there's agriculture. But if you look at agriculture today, it's actually heavily industrial in terms of the ways in which it consumes industrially produced things like synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, the way in which it consumes large amounts of energy, like in the form of fossil fuels for running tractors, etc., but also electricity, which is produced through extremely capital-intensive units like dams or for that matter power plants. Energy that is used to extract groundwater to pump from dams and so forth. And this extremely resource-intensive form of agriculture is made possible by extracting minerals, by extracting resources from landscapes around the world. And therefore, if you look at the ecological footprint of the kind of industrial agriculture we're talking about, it actually spans across the world, and this is